Alrighty, good afternoon, gamers. We're back again with another Mythic Plus guide. We're here doing a 22 Tol'Dagor this week. It is a tyrannical, bursting, skittish week, so a pretty good push week all in all things considered. Tol'Dagor being one of the easier keys. You could do a 22 on pretty much any week. One of the most important things about Tol'Dagor is how you end up managing your way, making your way through the first half of the instance, and how you do end up dealing with those cannons. So that's very important, as you will see later on. Some talents that I ended up using here are Force of Nature, so we got the trees. We got Renewal. So basically, I like Renewal for Overseer Korgus specifically, and the Sand Queen. I actually don't end up using it enough here. I end up swift bending a lot, which is fine, but I end up just like neglecting to use Renewal, so I actually don't get a lot of value out of taking this talent as I would have gotten out of Wild Charge or other options. So I actually kind of regret taking the talent because I do end up actually dying because I don't end up using it later on. Just somewhere that I could have had a little bit more of an optimization. Of course, Restoration Affinity, Swift Mend, and Wild Growth Healing while bursting is very important here. You actually do see these sand crabs, these silk crabs going down here. I'll end up Swift Mending somebody at the very end. You see me actually Swift Mending the tank right there. Just making sure that everybody's kind of propped up. I also throw out a Wild Growth there. So that's a good way, just a good indication of how you end up using the Restoration Affinity in order to be able to keep everybody topped up. Make sure that you do end up giving your healer a little bit extra help during that bursting, whatever that is going on. In addition to that, I have Typhoon. So you could actually play Typhoon or Mass Entangle here, depending on how you want to end up doing the cannons. I generally prefer Typhoon, though. I got Incarnation. I think Incarnation is just by far better than Star-Lord and Mythic Plus. I think it's a lot to do with personal preference, but in the end, I also do believe that Incarnation, just with how you end up getting value-wise just out of 3-minute cooldowns, is going to generally be better in Mythic Plus, so I prefer Incarnation in pretty much all situations. Twin Moons, you're not going to really play anything else on this row, so Twin Moons is obviously a staple pick. And then, of course, you could actually make an argument for Shooting Stars on the Tier 100 row versus Fury Valoon, but I much prefer Fury Valoon for pretty much all situations just because of how Burst works in Mythic Plus. Of course, you could actually play Shooting Stars in Tol'Dagor, and the reason for that being is because it's mostly bosses, just with how you end up dealing with cannon, but that's just something to be think of. So we are already engaged with the Sand Queen. Of course, I did get that first upheaval. I ended up popping my Bark Skin and using my Engineering Belt there. Reason for that being is I wanted to make sure that I did not die to that upheaval. I will be getting Iron Bark, rotating between Bark Skin and Iron Bark if I do end up getting multiples of that upheaval just back to back in order to be able to make sure that I do have enough defensive survivability. Because on a 22 Tyrannical, it's pretty easy to kind of get gimmick killed by the upheaval if you're not careful. In addition to that, after the first upheaval, we elect to use our Bloodlust. Everybody ends up holding their cooldowns, so we're making sure that we get a full use of the Bloodlust here. We also make sure that we do soothe the Sand Queen there, as you actually did see me soothe it right before it did do that burrowing, and before it does the upheaval. You see the upheaval ends up going on our Demon Hunter Shaz. He ends up dashing away from it, so just something to be looking out for. And then I end up using trees there on those drones to make sure that they're not giving the whole entire group too many stacks. So overall, we're actually running a pretty traditional Tol'Dagor composition too. Not super, it's obviously just a pretty meta comp. Protection Warrior, Outlaw Rogue, Havoc Demon Hunter because their survivability and healing in a Tol'Dagor is very strong. And then we, of course, have the Restoration Druid. Resto Druid's really, really OP, so just something to be thinking of. So basically, we as a Moonkin, we're going to be letting the rest of the comp and the rest of the classes be looking to DPS down the buzzing drones. Of course, Outlaw Rogue and Demon Hunter have a lot of passive cleave, and it's very efficient from Blade Flurry and Eye-Beam. Whereas Moonkin, it costs a lot for us to be able to AoE. You actually do see me end up dropping a Starfall there just because of how many buzzing drones we did have out. If they're alive for too long, you'll actually end up seeing us get too many stacks. Like you actually did see Versify there having a 12 stack of the buzzing drone dot. So if you end up having too many of those stacks, it can actually just be kind of scary. You actually see Verse dropping really low. I looked to Swift Mend him. We actually pop our Rally too because we were getting really low there. And so soothing the Sand Queen whenever it does end up getting high on stacks is also important. So basically once the buzzing drones die, you actually get 1 stack of the Enrage on the boss. So us as a Moonkin or Restoration Druids can soothe the Sand Queen's Enrage effect off. So that's just always something that you should be looking to think about. Because it'll do a lot of damage from the Sandstorm and other areas just by that. You actually do see Verse getting so low again there, end up Swift-Mending himself. And again, Moonkin utility, especially in high keys, revolves a lot around how we end up using our off healing, especially on weeks like this with bursting and whatever else. But in general, just even other weeks, just making sure that you make good use of your off healing is very important because balance doesn't do exactly the biggest damage, and the reason for that being is just how undertuned Starfall is in general. If Starfall was maybe used on like 2 or 3 targets, we could just justify just being a damage mongo and just only DPS men. But you have to actually be looking to play super well on balance to make sure that it works out for you and it works for you. So making sure that you do make really good decisions with your play is important. You actually see me do get Incarn back up, and regardless of like the key level, I'm going to be looking to pop the second Incarn here pretty much ASAP, and the reason for that being is because we're going to be like running through the instance. I'm not going to be hitting stuff very much until we do get the C speakers upstairs in the Jess Hallis area. So making sure that you actually do use your second use of Incarnation, either whether or not it's on the Sand Queen or whether or not it's on these buzzing drones that are in this tube area. I guess these stinging parasites, whatever they're called anyways. And this tube area is very important just because you do get efficient usage out of that Incarnation. So we are going to be making our way through the jail here in just a couple seconds as these parasites do end up going down. Again, I'm using my Swiftmend. I actually do have a switch hitter trait, so I also get a shield whenever I'm Swiftmending people. So I'm going to normally look to not Swiftmend myself if I can avoid it, because I do end up getting a lot of value just by how the shield ends up coming out for me. So you're going to see us here. We're going to be looking to death skip this Iron-Tide Thug. Reason for that being is that it does in fact have True Sight, so we could just like passively stealth through it or something otherwise, but there's no real need whenever we're just going to end up death skipping it. So you see the tank pull it to the side. He ends up going down. We're going to be looking to mass res him in a second after we do make our way here. We use a banish and a sap right here on this striker and this arsonist. And we're going to be walking up in stealth, just making sure that we don't end up pulling anything. Of course, Sap and Banish are true CC. The Banish from the Demon Hunter and the Sap from the Rogue. They're true CC, meaning that nobody's going to ever get in combat with them. And then you actually do see a Sap and a Blind on these two strikers right here. Blind is not a true CC though, but Versify is going to be in combat with that one striker, and he's the only person that's going to be in combat. He's going to vanish it off in a second. And then we're going to be looking to res the tank while Verse is actually running through running around, getting buffs out of the cages. So that's going to be good. I think Verse is actually going to look to shroud us all the way through first, so we can actually kill some of the yellow mobs while he's actually unlocking the cages. And then we're going to be running back, or then he's going to be meeting back up with us right before we end up pulling the C speakers. So that's just one of those time efficiency things that you actually need to be looking to do out of high keys. Of course, Tol'Dagor, not exactly the most time-sensitive dungeon. Reason for that being is because of how lenient the timer is relative to the cannon's damage. Okay, so Versify actually is just getting the cages now, and then we'll shroud through all together. So sometimes you're going to end up doing a little bit more time-sensitive thing where you end up shrouding them through. The Rogue ends up coming back on his own, and then grabbing the buffs while you guys are fighting a couple mobs. But obviously we don't need that. As I said, it's not exactly the most time-sensitive dungeon. So Verse ends up walking up, shrouding. We end up getting a sap and a banish there, so we don't pull anything. Of course, you don't need those. You can actually just kind of walk past them if you want, but it is one of those things that is useful for you to just do, just to make sure that you don't end up pulling some mobs. And you actually do see me getting my Incarn up again. Like I said, that's the reason that you end up using it so quickly on the Sand Queen or those drones that you want to, is because you don't, if you are doing like a more push-style strategy, we end up not pulling stuff in that lower level. It just won't, you're just not going to get efficient usage out of it anywhere else, so just making sure that you use it on cooldown is important. It's also important to know that those C speakers will end up casting Salt Blast into your tank, so you should actually be looking to layer your trees and your Solar Beam independent of one another, meaning that like you don't use them together. So you trees first and then you beam out of the trees, or you beam first and then trees out of the beam. But making sure that you still are getting kicks on the watery downs is important. Otherwise, you're going to be you'll be saving your tank some damage, but you could actually save him more just by layering your cooldowns a little bit better on those mobs. Alrighty, and we're pulling a bunch of arsonists and scallywags here, making sure that we don't end up getting too many stacks of bursting here. Bursting can actually be kind of scary here if we're not super careful, but making sure that we don't end up rolling the stacks over or we end up getting a lot of off healing is important. We actually roll through a 6 stack right here, and we're dropping so low. I don't have Swiftmend up. I use it as soon as I can. I end up using Renewal as well, so I actually end up using my Renewal, but again, I don't even think it was like that great of a usage. Let me look at this. Let me look at the timing of when I use it. So I actually end up using the Renewal after my bursting ends up falling off. So again, like that's not, again, like I stated earlier on in it, I don't get good usage out of my Renewal. I should have used it like instantly, and then I would have been fine as well. But then I was obviously looking to swip in the tank, which was actually a really good move. So swipping in the tank there is actually really smart for me. But I didn't get good usage of Renewal. So again, it's just one of those things that I would have been maybe better off just not playing Renewal or maybe playing Wild Charge, because I think that might have actually been my first Renewal of the instance. I would assume that I probably used it at some point on the Sand Queen, but again, I didn't actually have to have it. Of course, it's very good on the Sand Queen because it can top you if you're actually scared of dying to the upheaval. But again, it's just one of those things. I actually kind of panic beamed. I tried to panic beam the watery dome, but it ends up going through anyways, which is not great. But we do have Blood Elf racials as we are Horde, so we're actually able to get that watery dome shield off. That we also do have Demon Hunters as well, which have its Consume Magic, which is also a purge. So we actually do have some purges available to us in this comp with that Blood Elf racial and that Consume Magic. And we have popped our first Reaping of the instance here. We actually end up casting Starfall for the second time in this instance, and we're going to end up casting Starfall for the majority of this Reaping. Reason for that being is that it is a lot of even health mobs that need to die within similar time frames, so making sure that we're getting efficient amount of damage here. Maybe I alternatively could have maybe have stored Astral Power and got my Pulsar up to 8 here, and then we pulled Jess with my Pulsar proc like pretty much available so that I could do a little bit more damage to him. But overall, just Starfalling there for damage efficiency is not exactly the worst possible thing. Of course, there are some Strikers there that could actually make your tank a little bit scared for his life, but Strikers and their Throw Rock ability aren't exactly the worst thing. Alright, and we just have 2 Reaping mobs left available to us. Honestly, we should actually be looking to pull these Reaping mobs into Jess, just for damage efficiency, because, of course, if... I guess it's only 4, but if your tank is actually able to survive, which is a problem where you definitely should be able to, we should be looking to pull it into Jess just because of like potion efficiency. So basically, on average, your like one usage of potion will only save you about 3 to 4 seconds across all 5 players. So we should have just like pulled it straight into Jess and just chained it straight through, but we end up wasting a little bit of time there. I actually dodge out of the ground effect. I actually end up proccing my Pulsar right before we pulled Jess, so a big mistake on my end. But you actually do see me holding my Incarn here. I'm going to be looking to use it with our Bloodlust whenever that comes up, whenever Jess ends up running the back half here after his 70% phase. Alright, and you see the first Flashing Dagger cast, and it's important to note that I do end up dodging out of line of sight of this Flashing Daggers. That's part of how you end up dealing with the mechanic. All of Jess Howlis' abilities, including this Howling Fear or the Flashing Daggers, can actually be line of sighted. So if you are worried that you're not going to end up getting a kick or kickoff or something like that, compositions with the Moonkin will sometimes have to end up line of sighting the Howling Fear just because of not having a kicks available, with how the Vicious Mauling comes from Bobby a little bit later on. And you might end up seeing maybe how we should have ended up dealing with that just a little bit differently, just because of how we end up running out of kicks. And that's a downside of Moonkin, is that availability of kicks is pretty low. But for a lot of dungeons, it doesn't end up mattering most of the time, but it does end up mattering here just because of who the Vicious Mauling ends up going on. So now Jess is making his way down the hallway, and you actually see me dotting up these raiders, making sure that Jess ends up being dotted as well. I end up proccing my Pulsar, and I stand here, and I am just chasing him down. I end up trying to wild charge, and I completely forget, so I flip my camera like I'm going to wild charge through the area, and I end up popping my renewal there. So again, like I said, not great with renewal. I might want to practice that a little bit more. Most of the time I'm decent with it in Temple of Sethralis, but for some reason in Tol'Dagor I'm just not comfortable with it a lot of the time. I could definitely be using it better, and I should definitely be looking to probably use it a little bit more in the future. For Moonkin, for pushing, renewal actually is very strong, but it ends up coming at a pretty significant damage loss a lot of the time, just because of how you end up having to lose a lot of casts just by virtue of not having that mobility cooldown. So we do end up dodging away out of our first Flashing Dagger here. I ended up having to beam the first Vicious Mauling cast on Bobby because I'm backup for Versify. So Versify ends up having the main kick on Bobby, but he ends up Vicious Mauling verse, so I end up having to get the backup. Making sure that that was kicked is important here. And you actually do see Bobby ends up running off. He's going to end up casting his Howling Fear pretty far away, so we're actually dodging out, making sure that we're in this cubby area. So basically, the reason that we end up not using this this edge over here is because Bobby's over in this area casting his Howling Fear, so we need to make sure that we walk into this cubby area in order to be able to dodge out of the Flashing Dagger and the Howling Fear. Because if we got hit by the Howling Fear, we could end up potentially walking into the Flashing Dagger and end up going down, which is actually super scary. And you see Shaz here getting stunned by the Vicious Mauling. Obviously, if we rewind here for a couple seconds, none of us had our kicks available to them. Shaz is coming up in a couple seconds. He's dying here. I end up electing to Swiftmend him just to try to make sure that he ends up getting kept up. And you see Tomo, our healer here, popping all of his healing into him as we do finally have a kick available to us. Shaz ends up getting out of that, which wasn't exactly great, but we end up making it work, making sure that we end up pumping a bunch of heals into him. Again, we use this corridor area in order to be able to dodge out of the way of Jess's flashing daggers. Again, Bobby's, of course, on the other side of the map here in just a couple seconds. He ends up casting that Howling Fear. I end up beaming it. So that's actually a really good beam on my end because we were looking to line of sight that Howling Fear because we don't end up having enough kicks available to us if we end up using it on that Howling Fear from Bobby. So making sure that I do end up beaming that from a ranged point is important. You see Call here, he's going to end up walking up, pulling some of the mobs back for us, and the reason for that being is that we want to end up just walking by some of the mobs. You end up getting a lot of your percent from the cannon, so we don't actually end up needing a lot of the count from some of the mobs in the hallway, and they're just kind of annoying. It's like a thug, and then it's like I don't really exactly remember what it is. I'm pretty sure there's an Iron-Tired thug, and there's a couple mobs that nobody ends up pulling. I think it's like an officer or something. Okay, so there's a jailer, a thug, and an officer. So basically, a lot of high health mobs that cast like Riot Shield and stuff that you just really don't want to end up dealing with. So making sure that you end up either death skipping, like we were using Call here, in order to do is, it's not the quickest, but it is a good strategy. Of course, it's not exactly time efficient to be looking to death skip stuff like that, especially since it takes so long to get those mobs in position, but it is pretty good nevertheless. All right, and we were making good use of Sap and Banish again in order to be able to make sure that those mobs stay out of combat with us. And we're going to be looking to pull some of the mobs into the cannon here for our first usage of the cannon of the instance. Obviously, you do see Tomo and I in stealth sitting here for a second. We're going to be getting in combat. I'm going to be looking to Typhoon this mob into the corner here. Okay, so it actually ended up walking up and got in position on its own. I end up instantly popping in Karn. Of course, not necessary, but still nice just because you do end up getting some damage here just out of the Incarn. Of course, it's not like I said, it's not necessary, and the reason for that being is that almost all of your damage here is coming from the cannon, as you actually do see like the damage meter doing a nice solid 30k DPS as Versify is doing 330k, so Outlaw Rogue truly is an OP spec in Mythic Plus. But it just is what it is. The cannons overall in Tol'Dagor are very strong. You actually do see Versify ending up shooting this wall in this area right here. It ends up pulling these mobs through the wall. You actually do see those markers. We have an auto marker, Weak Aura, that the tank ends up using. So those mobs do end up getting marked there. And so Baluster is actually really good utility-wise for dealing with cannon. You have trees and Typhoon available to you. So making sure that the mobs end up staying grouped up, as you actually do see me use Typhoon there, is very important. A lot of the times that these pulls can end up going wrong is because of the mobs getting spread from one another, and you're actually able to not DPS them down quickly enough with the cannon. Just because, like, if you have like a small pack of like 2 or 3 here, a small pack of 2 or 3 here, and like a small pack of 2 or 3 here, the cannon's not going to have like a large target pool in order to be able to what to focus. So it's going to be very challenging. So making sure that you're utilizing like Ursula's Vortex is like a Resto Druid, Ring of Peace if you have like a Monk, Typhoon, trees, all very important. And that's the reason that you can end up using Mass Entangle if you really want. So the cannon can shoot like one of the backpacks, and the backpack can walk all the way into the front pack. You end up, he ends up getting another shot off in order to activate both. You Mass Entangle, so they're sitting there on top of one another. There's no chance for them to Riot Shield or shoot Suppression Fire or whatever else and get separated out, because that's actually where the pack gets scary. So utilizing either Typhoon or Mass Entangle as a balanced druid, very important. And that's one of the reasons that Moonkin's actually very strong in this instance. That, plus the fact that most of it's just, of course, boss damage, makes it really easy for the most part for you to be looking to just DPS down all the bosses and just utilize your cooldowns in the best available way. Of course, we're kind of just AFK though. I mean, of course, there is a lot of utility that you do need to be playing towards as a balancer here, as you do see the trees coming out, making sure I'm going to be looking to solar beam this as soon as that's available. You actually do see the mobs get separated. I look to Typhoon it a little bit. Just making sure that you do get your utility down, but by and large, you're just kind of sleeping, hanging out, hanging with your friends. The cannon will generally prioritize like the Marines and the other mobs, as opposed to the reaping, while you and the rest of the group, you and the other 4 members end up dealing with the reaping. The reason for that being is the reaping by itself is not normally very scary, and you can actually 4 DPS it pretty easily. And if the cannon is preoccupied with other Marines or a pack that would generally be too big to tank, it's just important that the cannon has priority on the rest of the mobs. You actually do see some of those reaping mobs getting on top of our cannon. I look to Typhoon them off of him just in order to be able to make sure that it does end up being easy for him to not go down, because the rogue can actually get killed in the cannon, even though rogue is pretty OP. So sometimes he'll end up stepping out of the cannon in order to like dodge out of the way of ground effects or get away from reaping or vanish it off or whatever else. So making sure that the rogue is safe is important. So utilizing your Typhoon in that way can also be very good. All right, you do see our tank pulling the last couple of mobs that we do need from that interior officers' quarters area, just so that we can end up using the cannon. Again, Tol'Dagor cannon simulator. I'm sure if you guys have been paying attention to any of the MDI stuff, this is not news. Cannon is incredibly overtuned here. But as a Moonkin, you can actually still play well. I end up using my Incarn here, which in retrospect, okay, so after the fact, of course, that's not like the best Incarn that I could have ended up getting, just because of where it ends up lining up on Knight Captain Valeri. But it ends up being okay because, again, Tol'Dagor, you're not like pressured for time. And Knight Captain Valeri is one of those fights that you only end up wiping if you mess up the barrels to some degree. So making sure that you actually just get the barrels positioned correctly is the most important part. And we can talk about how you end up positioning the barrels whenever we do end up getting that fight. Again, Trixing the tank here as Versified is inside the cannon. I end up getting a pretty bad Typhoon there. I Typhoon overlap with our Resto Druid's Ursula's Vortex, so just a little bit lapse in communication. And that's a lot of what Tol'Dagor is just talking to one another. Additionally, it can be kind of scary if your person who's manning the cannon is not being very aware of how the bursting stacks are panning out. So making sure that everybody's just kind of paying attention to that is important. You actually see me get a fat Trance there. It's so fucking good. So I end up getting most of the mobs from the Reaping grouped up, all except for 4 mobs grouped up with the Trents there, so they're just stacked. You actually do see Versify end up dealing with those very quickly. You just want them separated from the whole entire group because you don't want them getting too close to Versify, especially if his Trix has fallen off the tank. So you see us hopping out of the cannon here, just dealing with the last couple Reaping mobs. Are going to end up hopping back in the cannon. Verse is going to shoot like right in front of him as close as possible, kills the last Reaping, and we're on to Knight Captain Valeri. You can also look right here. I have 1 minute and 7 seconds left on Incarn just because of that poor usage that I was talking about. Again, it's just one of those things that happens. Like, it's not going to end up being that big of a deal. I'm going to elect to just move barrels a lot of the time, waiting for my Incarnation to come back up. I end up proccing my Arcanic Pulsar as I do get that 1 barrel in a pretty good spot. I see this other barrel that's going to go off a little bit closer in the middle of the room than I would prefer. So I grab it, make sure that it's positioned in the corner, and then we're good to go. So that's something that you should actually be looking to note, is that as long as the barrels are all in the corners around the room, you're going to be overall in a pretty good position, because the odds of them blowing up all 4 of those corners at once is very low. So making sure that you don't have a barrel out in the middle of the room is the most important thing. As you do see us here, looking to grab all these barrels, drop them in a corner. You see the Cinder Flame going off. I'm making sure that I'm not going to get hit by that. And you do see us, again, we have 3 open corners of the room here. You actually do see these barrels are about to get lit by this ground effect. There's no point in ending up getting them moved because we are not currently active inside that corner. So we're going to be looking instead to move to a free corner. I actually end up grabbing that barrel that would have actually gotten chained by that Cinder Flame. So I end up having to move it all the way across the room. I think overall, I think it might have been okay, but there's no reason to really risk it because Knight Captain Valeri, of course, not very challenging damage-wise, and it's not very challenging in general. It's literally just, like I said, barrel simulator. So moving it on my end is a significantly safer play. And overall, I think Balanced Druid and Keys is just like one of those things that you should be looking to play safe as opposed to playing aggressive. Utilizing your healing utility, your Trents, your Solar Beam. Of course, Nature's Balance is like a better damage option in Mythic Plus, but maybe not like an insignificant margin either. Maybe like 2 or 3k overall DPS, but again, there's no real need to play it, especially since Treants are by most intents and purposes, like almost like a 10-second stun. It ends up giving your tank a lot of breathing room. So you just have to have like a little bit different of a perception of how to play as a balanced druid. And overall, I think that perception is what allows players to go from good to great, right? And you see the Cinder Flame being cast, we end up moving some of the barrels out of the way. The boss is actually dropping pretty low here, sub 30%. And we're going to be looking to burn it after we end up moving these barrels in just a couple seconds. You actually do see our rogue. So you can actually use like Wild Charge or Grapple or other movement abilities while you're moving the barrels. So of course some classes are way better at moving barrels than others. For some reason you can't actually use Bull Rush, which is actually very sad. I think the reason for that being is actually it's like a channel or whatever. So it'll end up dropping the barrel, but you can use stuff like Wild Charge. So that's something to note if you're not playing Renewal in this instance. Alright, we can actually kind of skip through Knight Captain Valyri, not too much more. So we are making our way. So after Knight Captain Valyri, we end up banishing this mob here. We're going to end up walking past it. So it does actually have True Sight, so you can actually grapple sap or you can banish it. We end up using our Shroud here. We're going to end up killing a couple mobs in order to be able to get us to like 97-ish%. We don't want to proc our last Reaping of the instance, and the reason for that being is that it can end up being it's just not necessary to proc your last Reaping or deal with it in general. So we're going to end up having one of those mobs that we did end up banishing just kind of sitting there. Just kind of sitting there in that crowd control effect. And then we are on to Overseer Korgus here. So I'm positioning in a way that I'm going to be not knocked back by the Explosive Blast. So use a range, you're going to get Explosive Blast every single time, which can actually be kind of scary if you're not being careful. So I end up popping my Incarn here. And this is what I was talking about with why I wanted Renewal. So basically on Overseer Korgus, basically depending on the spell queuing, you can actually end up getting doubles of this Explosive Burst. So you'll end up getting Explosive Burst, then he'll end up casting Azerite rounds, and you'll get Explosive Burst again, just depending on kind of his spell queuing. So making sure that you're 100% topped is important, just with how the spell queuing works of the fight. So you actually do see the first double of the instance coming out right here. Just because if he casts that Explosive Burst, you actually did end up seeing him cast that Azerite rounds. Here, I'll rewind it so you guys can see. Explosive Burst, he's casting the Azerite rounds. We're getting a double. So I'm going to end up Swift Mending myself, making sure that I'm high enough health in order to be able to be okay. And I actually end up dying here with potion, with my potion available and my renewal available. So I could have used both, but I end up getting hit down to like 10%, and then I end up going down to the dot. So I underused cooldowns. I thought I was going to be okay. I could have also bear formed, but I was being greedy with my Incarn. So I just made a mistake there. So that's just something that, again, on Overseer Korgus, we have so much time. We literally have 8 minutes. So you're going to end up seeing me doing this a little bit. I'm going to end up bear forming a lot of these Explosive Blasts after this because, again, like I said, it's not really necessary for me to eat them like unmitigated. Of course, like right there, that one was not exactly unmitigated in some degree because I don't end up having Bark Skin available to me. So I wasn't like hard trolling in that degree. And I did end up Swift Mending, but I did have other tools that I could have utilized to make sure that I end up living. Because the doubles, especially on like a 22 Tyrannical, can be so scary. And you see me actually just dropping so low. But yeah, like I said, there's no real need for me to be looking to underuse cooldowns, especially on like a double. And I end up the reason I actually end up dying is because Tomo didn't, like, he said this in voice. He said he didn't realize that we were getting a double. So after this, I end up calling out every single double or single that we get, and just so that we can, just so that he's not confused or unaware of what's happening. Because as a healer, it can get kind of distracting. And it's really easy to get distracted with the doubles and the singles on this fight, especially if you actually have to heal, because this is actually a pretty healing intensive fight. You'll end up ending this fight about 40k HPS overall, something like that, from the 30 to 40k range. You actually see me go back and bear. I end up hitting Moonfire a couple times. I swap out a bear. But like I said, we're so far ahead of the timer, there's no need for me to be looking to gamble my survivability with that. And that's why me not renewaling or health potioning was actually just so troll. It was just me being greedy, honestly, because I had Incarn rolling. I didn't want to swap to bear, but I did end up using like Swiftmen, so it was just a stupid mistake. So you see me here swapping in bear. I end up I get the Deadeye shot on me. I don't end up moving out of the way so that the Demon Hunter can have an easy time soaking it. We actually do get a double here. I bear the first one. I bear the first part of the double. We get the darkness out. We get a rally. We're popping all of our cooldowns because the boss is at 27%. And the only really way we wipe here is if we end up having people go down to the double. I end up using Renewal, but not needed. I just end up using it to top myself out of the second double, the second part of the double, because of course I was like really high health going into the first Azurite rounds cast. Or not Azurite rounds, Azurite rounds cast. Explosive burst cast. So you see me here, end up going Bear again. Even on my Incarn, again, like the damage is not what's going to end up wiping us here. We're only going to end up wiping is if like multiple people goes down. So if like our healer and our tank end up going down like almost simultaneously, then we could potentially wipe. But that would be so hard at like 7%. We'd almost be able to like kite the boss out. We get another double. You actually see me end up swift mending and wild growthing, making sure that we're all healthy enough. I end up having my bark skin available, so there's really no fucking way that I die to a double. Like, if you have your bark skin available, there should be like almost no chance that you die to a double, but if you don't have it available, there is like a way that it ends up happening just because of the mitigation. So we are still at 97%, as you do see here from our enemy forces count. So we do have this one Ashvane Warden here sitting off to the side that we're going to end up using the cannon to take out. You actually are going to see our tank end up getting shot because we're trolling here at the very end of Tol'Dagor. I actually end up dodging out of the way of that shot, fortunately enough. The Ashvane Warden here, I end up rooting it just so it stands in place so it's easier to get shot down. And that's going to be Tol'Dagor 22. I hope you guys enjoyed this style of content and stuff like that. Hope you guys check out my stuff in the description, my Twitch, my Patreon, my Discord, all that stuff. So if you guys liked it, leave a like if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.